Hello everyone and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel. Today I'm here to do something I've wanted to do for a very long time, and that is show you my PlayStation game collection. And this is any game that I have that was published by Sony Interactive Entertainment or some Sony Computer Entertainment America. They change their names occasionally, but any game that is a PlayStation property, PlayStation published game, I'm going to be showing you in my rather large collection today. And as you can tell, I have already removed them all and organized them in alphabetical order, which is how I'm going to be going through this video because my my shelves are a little bit empty down there. There's a little bit of spaces. That's because most of the games that I buy on PlayStation systems are published by PlayStation, are PlayStation games. And so today I'm going to be going through every game that I own and hopefully showing you guys a little bit about PlayStation history that you weren't aware of, because there are some weird games in here that are totally forgotten by time. And also I'll give you a little bit of stories about buying them, about collecting for PlayStation, and some of the things that I've learned going through and buying a lot of PlayStation games. But of course, if you are into PlayStation, if you're into Nintendo, if you're into game collecting, if you're into games history, culture, conversation, subscribe to Backlog Banter. Like this video. I'm obviously putting a lot of work into this. This is a very long project for me to work on by myself, so I really hope you guys enjoy looking at my collection of PlayStation games. So as I said, I'm going to be doing this in alphabetical order, and that's going to mix in all sorts of series and styles and consoles. So it's going to be a complete mixed grab bag of anything PlayStation, just kind of all in one big mishmash. But the first game on this list is actually a game that's weirdly important to this channel, and that is Ape Escape on the Loose. Now, this is just a random game that I have. I have no particular attachment to it. I like the original Ape Escape. This is a remake of that on PSP. But I had a video about 4 years ago in one of my Backlog Banter videos where I said this was an elephant and I chucked it behind me.
Okay. So then we can really
let's pretend that this copy of Ape Escape on the Loose on PSP is an elephant.
Fair. We're gonna check.
And then it kind of became a meme. It's an emote on my Discord server, which you should join. But it has no particular significance to me other than the fact that it's important to this channel because it's kind of a meme, and I've always had it in my background. It goes right there next to my copy of Marvel's Avengers, which is also an iconic game to my channel's history, but very fun that this is the alphabetically first PlayStation game that I own. It's the only Ape Escape game that I own. The other ones are a little bit more expensive. This one, frankly, no one really cares about or remembers. But yes, remake of Ape Escape 1 on PSP called Ape Escape on the Loose. That is the first game in my PlayStation collection. Next, we have Astrobot Rescue Mission. This is the PSVR game that I got from my roommate and friend and co-host on this channel, Abram. Any PSVR game I have here today is because he gave me his PSVR. It made him sick. He gave it to me. I have since platinumed Astrobot Rescue Mission, which is a phenomenal game. And if you have PSVR, I'm sure you've played this, but you absolutely should. Or go play Astro's Playroom free on PS5, which obviously doesn't have a physical version, so I don't have it. And Astrobot coming out on September 6th. I feel like I'm being paid by Sony to do this, but I just really like these games. But yes, Astrobot comes out in September, but go play Astrobot Rescue Mission. Phenomenal 3D platformer on PSVR. Really great game. Very fun platinum too. Next up, we have 5 games in a forgotten PlayStation series, and I have all but one of every one of these games that was ever put out, and that is the ATV Offroad Fury series, developed by Climax Entertainment. These are just racing games on the PS2. One thing that you'll notice as we go through a lot of these games is that Sony used to publish a lot of non-Gran Turismo racing games, and this was definitely one of those series. It was a 6-entry series as far as I know. There are 4 on PS2. I do not have ATV Offroad Fury 4. I bought a copy of it. I opened it up. It was a disc for ATV Offroad Fury 1 in there, and then there were 2 sort of remakes of, I think, 1 and 3 or something like that on PSP called ATV Offroad Fury Blazing Trails and ATV Offroad Fury Pro. So yeah, I'm sure you guys didn't really know about the ATV Offroad Fury series, but there are a lot of them, and I have nearly all of them. I will go back and very soon complete my ATV Offroad Fury collection because it's a little bit unsatisfying to have basically all of them, but not all of them. Next, we got the first PS3 game we're going to be talking about today, and that is, boom, Beyond Two Souls, starring Elliot Page. I'm not going to dead name them. And Willem Dafoe. This is a Quantic Dream game. They also made Heavy Rain, which we'll talk about later, and Detroit Become Human, which I don't think I actually have. But I have not played this game. It's the only one of the Quantic Dream games published by Sony that I haven't played. But it's pretty interesting that this is one of the few Sony published games that prominently features the actors' names on the cover. I'm a fan of Quantic Dream. They are a little bit of a controversial company because of David Cage, the creative director of the studio, being a shithead, frankly. But I would like to get around to this. I have it downloaded through PS Plus on my PS5, so I'm going to get to that soon. But yeah, Beyond Two Souls. interesting that they have the actors' names prominently featured. This next one is by far my favorite game that we've talked about so far, which isn't a greatly big pool, but Bloodborne on PS4 is one of my favorite games of all time. Everyone knows Bloodborne if you're a sicko in the games community, but this is just maybe the best PS4 exclusive, certainly up there for me. I absolutely adore this game, of course, made by From Software, and they also did Demon Souls on PS3, which I do not have for Sony, but this is a game that everyone wants back because it's just so good. Every From Software game is good in its own right, but Bloodborne still to this day feels very distinct in its style, in its pacing, in its the way you do the combos, and the lore that's being fed to you. This is one of the masterpieces, I think, of PlayStation's history, and I'm so happy to have it, to share its praises, and show you guys this today. Bloodborne on PS4. Let's talk about a couple more PSVR games. Blood and Truth, developed by London Studio, and Bravo Team, developed, interestingly enough, by Supermassive Games, the people that did Until Dawn and The Quarry. But yeah, I played this game for a little bit. It's the last game that London Studio made before being shut down last year, or no, earlier this year. But it's very cool. It's very ambitious. It made me incredibly sick though. So if you are motion sick, you get motion sick easily. Don't play this, even though it is very, very cool, and I want to give it another try. Maybe I have to build up my PSVR C legs, but Blood and Truth is very cool. Bravo Team I have not played. I only got my PSVR about a month ago, and I've really only played Blood and Truth and Astro, which I've already talked about. Funny that those are the alphabetically first PSVR games that I have. But Bravo Team is, I think it's just kind of a war shooter, but it's just very interesting that Supermassive Games made this, because we only know them for horror, not visual novelty, but like, I don't know, like movie sort of thing. So very, very interesting part of their history that I think people kind of forget about. Let's talk about another forgotten Sony series, and that is the Buzz series of games. Now, this is the only Buzz game that I own, and that is Buzz the Hollywood Quiz for PS2. This is a trivia series of games hosted by this little guy here. He's kind of a funny Muppet-looking guy. That were on the PSP, PS2, PS3. They are just trivia games. There are kids ones that are the Buzz Junior series. There's a bunch of Buzz games. There's a bunch of Buzz games internationally that are never released in the US. And you play them with this contraption, which is 4 controllers that each have a series of 5 buttons on them, and you hand them to each of your friends. And it's a pretty cool way to make it mimic a live sort of trivia TV show experience. The game is formatted around that, and we had a lot of fun going through Buzz the Hollywood Quiz. Interesting thing about this game is they show a lot of clips and a lot of obviously just it's movie trivia, but they have the actual movie clips licensed in the game. So I think this came out, let's see, 2007, so obviously it stops there in terms of movies, but it's interesting to look back and see what movies were popular, what were they pulling from trivia for that they thought that anyone would be able to get or would be challenging. But me and my friends are very into movies, so we had a lot of fun with Buzz the Hollywood Quiz. I'd like to go collect the other games. I'm not sure if I'll play them. It's pretty hard to get your friends together to play a PS2 trivia game with a weird set of controllers, but this has kind of gone to time. The Buzz series was incredibly prolific, but they haven't made one of these in well over a decade at this point, so hopefully this taught you a little something about PlayStation history. Next, we got CoolBoarders 2001. There were, I think, 5 CoolBoarders games published by Sony, and if I'm remembering correctly, I believe the original ones were developed by Idle Minds, which is the dev company that eventually became Deck 9, the team that now handles the Life is Strange series with True Colors and soon to be Double Exposure. That's a weird connection through PlayStation history. But CoolBoarders, again, racing games. Weird racing games from PlayStation's history. Snowboarding racing games are not particularly popular anymore. I can't really think of any that have come out recently. But Sony published a bunch of them on the PS1 and PS2. Very interesting that this, again, has kind of gone to time as Sony has realized we can just kind of publish just Gran Turismo for our racing series. I don't love racing games myself, but I really find it fascinating how many weird racing series they had. And again, we talked about earlier the ATV series. That's ATV. You're on a 4-wheel vehicle and you're going up mud hills. This is a snowboarding thing. So there was a lot of variety as well in their racing games. Next, we got Daxter for PSP. This is a spinoff of the Jak and Daxter series, where it's just Daxter, believe it or not. And I've heard some people talking about this game being surprisingly good. It came to PS Plus. Extra? No. Essential? No. That's the other one. Premium, PS Plus Premium recently with trophies and on PS5, and so that's pretty cool. And I'd like to give it a shot. But I like the Precursor Legacy, which we'll get to later. But I've never actually played this game. I don't really know how different it is, but this is a perfect example of handheld games of this era just being like kind of forgotten spin-offs of their core series. So obviously Jak and Daxter pretty popular, pretty important for the mid-2000s Sony identity, but Daxter's kind of a weird forgotten part of that. This next one is special to me. That is Days Gone for PS4. I just played and platinumed this game a couple weeks ago. I'm actually meaning to be making a video about how this game, I think, doesn't deserve its hate and actually is quite a bit more special than people give it credit for. I really do adore this game. I think the main character on the front there, Deacon St. John, is one of the great underrated characters from PlayStation history. I think the gunplay is fantastic. It's got an amazing open world. The platinum is not too ridiculous, and I just thought that it was really, really engaging. It sold reasonably well. It's popular on PC, but Bend Studios in a weird place where we weren't able to make a sequel. So this is just a one-off part of Sony's history, which I don't mind. I actually find kind of interesting, but this is kind of an underrated gem. It's I guess a controversial game, but if you have not played Days Gone, give it a shot. It might not work for you, but I didn't think it would work for me, and then it really did, and this is a secret favorite of mine on PS4, so I love Days Gone. A similar open world game from Sony's 2019 is Death Stranding by Hideo Kojima Productions. I played this game a little bit when it came out. I definitely got it the day that it came out. I remember going to the Best Buy, and this is, of course, that copy. I played probably 5 or 6 hours of it, and I didn't really understand the mechanics. I found the element that you could like fall over and you had to like really careful about balancing your shit and pick it all up, and then the rain's destroying everything. I found it like really oppressive. But I want to give it another shot because Kojima is interesting and he's weird, and this is an interesting part of Sony's history that is, of course, now becoming a series. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach, I believe, is slated for next year. So I want to give this game another shot before the sequel comes out, and I want to lock into it, but I haven't gotten there yet. Let's talk about the secret forgotten FromSoft game in Sony's catalog, the PSVR game Deracine. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't really know what this game is, except for I know for a fact that it's not a Souls-like game. This is one of the few non-action titles that From Software has developed over the course of 15 years, something like that. They used to do some weird ones on like PS1, PS2, things like that. But Deracine is a PSVR game. I think that's kind of a horror game. The description on the back says, if a fairy cannot be seen, can it still exist? That doesn't sound like FromSoft, but it's so cool that they made this in collaboration with Sony. As we mentioned earlier with Bloodborne, they have a little bit of a history with them. I think that has since ended, since frankly, Sekiro and Elden Ring were so popular. But Deracine, forgotten part of not only Sony's history, because PSVR is kind of a forgotten part of Sony's history, but definitely a forgotten part of From Software's history. So there's a little fun fact for you today. I laughed as soon as I picked this up. Destruction AllStars is a PS5 game, one of, frankly, very few Sony published PS5 games in general, and it is definitely the most forgotten Sony published PS5 game. It is a car combat game made by Lucid. It was supposed to be at launch, and then no one was interested in it, and so they delayed it, and they put it out a couple months later on PS Plus. And I played it for a little bit. Servers are well dead, even though it's only been 3 years since it came out, and it's not very good. But I do have a soft spot. I want to choose my words carefully there. A soft spot for Destruction All-Stars in what it represents is a new one-off IP from Sony, which they seem, for a while, they were more and more reticent to do, just kind of something that's not a cinematic third-person action game. This is just some arcadey car combat fun. The character designs are fine. It has some good haptic feedback and DualSense vibration, but I don't recommend this game. But it's also by far, if you want to start collecting for PS5, this is where you start. This game goes for like $5, and it's always the one that goes on sale when like Best Buy is trying to get rid of their stock of PS5 games. Go get a copy of Destruction All-Stars. You won't regret it because it's funny. You might regret it because it's not a very good game. Let's talk about Dreams. This is Media Molecule's 2019 game that is a game creation tool that really flopped hard, and people did not particularly care about it. This game was in development for, let's see, LittleBigPlanet 2, 2011, Tearaway 2013. So for 6 years, if not more, because Tearaway was a smaller team. Dreams was in development for a very long time and came out at the tail end of the PS5 lifecycle in 2020. and didn't really grab any traction. This is an interesting copy. I haven't played this game. I'm not particularly interested in it. I might jump into it to try some of the games that Media Molecule themselves played or made. They made a game called Tren, which is a little train game. I don't know, kind of goofy. I like Media Molecule, but Dreams in what it is as a creation tool doesn't particularly appeal to me. I don't even really like Mario Maker, and I don't, as we'll get to Little Big Planet later, I don't really like the stage creation elements of those too much. But this is an interesting copy because this is I got this off eBay. This is a like Spanish copy or like a Mexican copy of this game, and so the top there says exclusiva on PlayStation, extend of exclusively or only on PlayStation, which is what the English copies have, and the back is in Spanish there. I don't really know how this works. I'm sure it'll work in my PS5, but I have no idea how I ended up with a Spanish copy of Dreams. Just didn't pay attention, I guess, because it looks the same on the front there. It's got the ESRB. It's got the same logo, obviously. So I don't know. Very interesting. Another underrated PS4 exclusive is Driveclub. This is the last non-Gran Turismo racing game, unless you count Destruction All-Stars, that Sony has published. This was made by the now-defunct Evolution studio that Sony used to own. And this game killed the studio because it took a long time to develop, and people weren't particularly interested in it. It received kind of middling reviews as it came out. But I'm not someone who's into racing games, as I've talked about. But I played this game, and I was really blown away by it. I mean, the servers are closed, so the social elements of the titular club parts of this game are no longer accessible. But I thought that the controls were great. It's a perfect mix between sim and arcade gameplay. And the maps are just gorgeous. They're all around the world. There's this one in India that I really like that has these big fields of flowers and the petals are flowing through the wind. There's Japanese one where the red maple trees. I was just blown away by the art direction of this game, and there's weather effects and stuff. I think this game is really, really underrated. I only played it for a couple hours, so that's kind of the max for me with any racing game, but this is another secret hidden gem kind of on PlayStation. Again, it doesn't work in the way that it was intended. You can't even go and buy the DLC anymore, and it's not even on the PlayStation Store, so you will need to get a physical copy if you want to play Driveclub, but I recommend it. I had a great time trying out this game, and rest in peace, Evolution Studio. Everybody's Golf is up next. This is the last game in the long-running Everybody's Golf / Hot Shots Golf series. We will get to some of those later. This is titled with an E. The other ones are titled with an H, so they are not together. But this was developed by Clap Hands, and Clap Hands made the Everybody's Golf / Hot Shots Golf series for like 20 years. Actually, interestingly enough, Hot Shots Golf, the first one on PS1, which I do not have a physical copy of. I don't really collect for PS1, as you'll notice here today. That was developed by Camelot, the team that now makes Nintendo's Mario Golf series and has for a long time. But this is the continuation of this series, and I'm sure the PS4 version is solid. I'm not particularly a golf guy, but I find it interesting how many of these games there were, and how, since especially the closure of Japan Studio, who helped Clap Hands make these games, I think they're done with this series. It'd be interesting to see it come back, but this is the PS4 version, and there's a separate game version of this for VR called Everybody's Golf VR. I don't have that, but yeah, I'll try this game eventually. I like one of the other Hot Shots Golf games, but yeah, this is a PS4 version. All right, it's time for the weirdest part of my collection. I have Judgement. You probably haven't heard of this game. PS3 exclusive from the early days of PS3 when none of their exclusives were really hitting. There are a few in established franchises that you might somewhat care about, but Eye of Judgment is just gone. And for a very specific reason. This was a PlayStation Eye focused game. It is a card battler, a physical card battler. You put cards out on the table and you battle them with your friends while the PlayStation Eye is looking at them. It has little holograms. It's kind of like the chess from Star Wars, I guess. But the reason I say this is the weirdest part of my collection, not only because it's a very strange game, not for Sony published, for someone to develop a AR card battling game for PS3 is already weird in itself, but I have a complete Eye of Judgment collection that I got from a store. They kind of were like, hey, you seem like a weird guy who's collecting weird stuff. Would you want to buy this? Because they'd had it for years. So I got 2 binders full of someone's organized collection of Eye of Judgment cards. Let's get a look at this here. Yeah, I haven't gone through these. They're organized by type, color. I class. I really have no idea. But apparently some things in here are actually worth something. So eventually I might go through this and sell a couple of the more expensive ones and trade them in for more games, frankly, because I don't know if I'm ever going to play Eye of Judgment. But I also have the Eye of Judgment thing that you point the camera, that is used to point the camera at the mat, which I also have. Is just I put this under my lamp on my bedside table because I think it's funny. But it's just a play mat with 9 spaces that says Eye of Judgment on it. So that's a very, very weird thing. And I also got 2 packs of Eye of Judgment cards that are not in very good condition. But again, this is all just about the weird pockets of Sony's history. I can't believe they did this. I can't believe they made apparently hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of cards, and you could buy these, obviously. They made a whole peripheral for this. I mean, does this mat count as a peripheral? I really have no idea. It's just a bizarre game. And I only spent like $70, I think, on the full collection of all those cards, the camera, these things, the mat, the camera stand. So it was a good deal, I guess, probably, for what I got, considering that this is something that no one really cares about. But I also might be able to turn a little profit on it if I ever bother to go through the cards. But it's just maybe the single most interesting part of my collection. Sorry, only 20 minutes in here that it's all downhill from here. But Eye of Judgment. What the hell is this? For this next section, we're going to keep the camera up here because this is the Eye section. We talked about Eye of Judgment, and now we're going to be talking about more EyeToy games, including EyePet. Yep. Sony made kind of a Nintendo style thing with this freaky goddamn monkey. You play it. You play with the monkey and like feed it and wash it. I draw with it, I guess, like pat its belly using the PlayStation 3 camera here and PlayStation Move. So I've got the PS Move wand here. I've not played EyePet yet. There's a sequel called EyePet and Friends, and there's also an EyePet game. I don't know if it's the same version of this game, but there's an EyePet for PSP. So this was a little series of Sony's history, but this little freaking monkey baby did not become a iconic part of PlayStation's history, but it is a part of PlayStation's history. And I also want to take a moment to tell you guys really how I focus in on collecting these things and how it's kind of easy to tell what's a Sony game if you're interested in going for Sony published games. Mid PS4, every Sony published game, as you'll start to notice now that I'm mentioning this, every Sony published game has this little diamond in the corner, and that is the Sony Interactive Entertainment logo. It was the original PS1 logo with the would make the little diamond. So if you're ever at a game store and you're not sure if a game is a Sony game on PS1, PS2, PS3, PSP, PS Vita, look for the yellow-orange diamond in the bottom. And so you might come across something that you've never heard of before, but is an interesting forgotten part of Sony's history. Look for that yellow diamond. So we've got the PS3 EyeToy here, but that was not the first EyeToy, because EyeToy was a PS2 thing. Again, also developed by London Studio. I'd be talking about them earlier when we were talking about Blood and Truth. They did lots of the weird sort of peripherally casual stuff for Sony's history and games, and they developed the EyeToy. And I believe, actually, part of the EyeToy development team was Nicholas Doucette, who's now the head of Team Asobi that makes the Astrobot games. So a little bit of a weird connection there. But obviously, this is an interesting part of Sony's history. They made a bunch of EyeToy games. I think I have all of them here. There might be one that I'm forgetting that I don't own. But let's just talk about the EyeToy games. Boom! Ugh! This is heavy. 6. No, wait. That's not an EyeToy game. 6 games here for the EyeToy. EyeToy Antigrav, EyeToy Groove, EyeToy Kinetic, EyeToy Operation Spy, and EyeToy Play, and EyeToy Play 2. I never played these games. I am interested to because I find this casual, experimental, hardware, peripheral-driven side of PlayStation's history to be incredibly fascinating, as we'll get to a couple other elements of that history soon. But the EyeToy is what started it all. They didn't really have any peripherally things like this on PS1. So if you're interested in a bizarre and very easy to collect part of PlayStation's history, go for EyeToy. An EyeToy camera, probably going to run you $15 or something like that. And then each of these games, none of these games cost me more than $7 or $8 or something like that. So each one in itself is pretty affordable. And then obviously, I think this is all of them, so it's not a particularly big collection. So one of the few complete collections that I have is a complete collection of PS2 EyeToy games. Praise me in the comments. Next is an interesting and forgotten part of PlayStation's history, and I've been saying that a lot, but this one I think is very special because this is Fantavision. And you might be like, What the hell are you talking about? What's Fantavision? Good question. I didn't know either until I played it about a year ago. It is on PS Plus Premium, so if you want to go try this game on there, you can. This is, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, the only PlayStation published game on PS2's launch. I mean, there were like 20-something PS2 games at launch, but Sony didn't publish almost any of them. So Fantavision is the only one, and this is a puzzle game where you shoot fireworks, and then you blow up the fireworks and make little chains of fireworks. So there's nothing like it. It's totally bizarre. It's a launch title for PS2 that is totally forgotten. It's one of the only, if not the only, Sony published game for PS2's launch. Now we have, PS4 launching with Knack and Killzone Shadowfall, and PS5 launching with Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales and Astrobot and all of that. This is what a launch lineup from Sony used to be. Fantavision. I actually like this game. It's very interesting. It's very unique. I played it for a couple hours. But it's just a forgotten part of PlayStation history that as the only, or maybe one of the only PlayStation published games at PS2's launch, just plays a really interesting role in PlayStation's history. Another PSVR game is Farpoint. I'm going to be honest, I don't have anything to say about this. I know that this is a shooter. It looks reasonably cool. It's kind of a space game. And it was best played with this gun, PSVR gun that has one of these squishy knobs on the front of it for PS Move. But I've not played Farpoint, and this is going to be a recurring theme with most of the PSVR games I collected. As soon as Abram gave me his PSVR, I decided that I wanted to buy almost every Sony-published PSVR game. That collection, none of them are particularly expensive either, but it's a much bigger collection than EyeToy. I think there are 15 or 16 Sony-published games on PSVR, which is, I think, a totally solid amount of titles, given that the system only lasted 4 years or so, and also compared to PSVR 2, where they only published one game, Horizon Call of the Mountain. I do not have a PSVR 2. I'm certainly not interested in paying that much money for a system that I'm not sure if I'd enjoy, and for a system that's clearly not being supported by its publisher. But yeah, this is my opportunity to talk a little bit about PSVR and my PSVR collection, which we'll return to later. I'm also interested in PS Move games. We talked about EyePet, which uses PS Move, and some of the PSVR games, which are compatible with PlayStation Move. But Sony also made a lot of games that were designed for PlayStation Move, or hired people to make games for PlayStation Move. And The Fight, Lights Out, is one of those games. This is a sort of boxing, or what's the word? Where there's basically no rules, and you just have your bare fists and you just beat up on each other. Yeah. That's one of these games, and you use the PlayStation Move controllers. An interesting element of this, basically the only thing I really know about it, is that it's got Danny Trejo on the back. Certainly the only PlayStation published game with Danny Trejo in the box art. That's neat. Here's another forgotten PlayStation series, the Genji duology of games. We got on PS2, Genji, Dawn of the Samurai, and on PS3, Genji, Days of the Blade. Now, these are just character action games. There's nothing particularly special about them, and that's kind of why they've gone forgotten. But the only thing that is notable, particularly notable for PlayStation's history about the Genji series, is that this was an early PS3 exclusive in an early era when there were not very many PS3 exclusives. But this is the thing that the giant enemy crab meme comes from. I believe it was E3 2005 or 6, one of the two.
The stages of the game will also be based on famous battles which actually took place in ancient Japan. So here's this giant enemy crab.
They were on stage and they were doing a demo of this game. It didn't work quite right, and they were fighting a giant enemy crab. And it was supposed to be they were also talking up the historicality of this game. They're like, oh, it's set in Japan, you're fighting in real battles, and then giant crab shows up. And so there's a giant enemy crab, which is a reasonably popular PlayStation meme. But yeah, that's from Genji Days of the Blade there. And there's also a PS2 game that came out before that called Genji Dawn of the Samurai. So yeah, I haven't played these, but it's an interesting part of PlayStation history. Returning to London Studio, I would say in the hardcore PlayStation community, outside of Blood and Truth, the Getaway is the most iconic game from London Studio. This is it's kind of a crime GTA style game where you go around a city and you shoot people and there's crime stuff. I haven't played it, but it's interesting that they published this, and it's kind of forgotten, but it's also, as I was saying, from London Studio, who was responsible for the EyeToy Games, as we'll get to later, the SingStar series, and then VR titles and weird peripherally nonsense stuff. But this is just a straight up classic third person action PS2 game. So yeah, the Getaway is interesting. There's a sequel called Getaway Black Monday. I think there also might be a PSP Getaway game. I'm not sure. I quite can't remember that. But yeah, the Getaway. That's interesting. Ghost of Tsushima is up next. This is from Sucker Punch Productions. Sucker Punch will probably be putting out a sequel to this game next year. And so in preparation, I am currently almost all the way through the platinum for Ghost of Tsushima. I did not play much of it in 2020 when it came out, though. I got this when it did come out. And I just beat it actually yesterday at the time of recording. And so I'm working my way through the platinum. It's a good game. It's a very good game. I'm very interested to see what they do with PS5 and a sequel, expanding on some of the mechanics and the story. But Ghost of Tsushima is one of the most popular original IPs on PS4 in an era where they were doing quite a bit of big games. This was the swan song for the system outside of cross-gen titles like Miles Morales and Horizon Forbidden West and Gran Turismo 7. But Ghost of Tsushima, good game. Excited to see what they do next, though, because I was, I guess, slightly underwhelmed by it. But I'm obviously enough fun that I'm going for the platinum of that game, which is not short. If you want the platinum, it's 40, 50 hours. So yeah, Ghost of Tsushima. Oh man, God of War. I love this game so much. Now, I do like God of War Ragnarok a lot more, but I really, really, really love this game. This was the first God of War game that I played. It does play into my interests in PlayStation games, which are of two minds. I like the weird casual stuff. As I've been showing you, my collection has quite a bit of that, but personally, in terms of my favorite games, I do gravitate towards the Last of Us, God of War style, third-person sad dad simulator, more dramatic, story-driven games, and this is one of those, and it's one of the best. I mean, I was just absolutely enraptured by the story, the performances. Both Christopher Judge and Sonny Soljic, who plays Atreus, are fantastic. The supporting cast, I think, is great. The combat is so crunchy. It's iconic and kind of been has said a lot of times, but the pullback of the Leviathan axe is as satisfying as you would want it to be, and it makes Marvel's Avengers, sorry back there when you're playing a store, feel really, really lame in comparison. Sony Santa Monica just knows how to make them, and I'm really excited to see what they do next. Apparently, they've got a new IP in the works. I don't own God of War Ragnarok, so I won't be showing you that right after this. But that's because for the first few years of having a PS5, I was using my roommate's PS5, and he only had the all-digital version. So I do not have many PS5 games that I've played on disc. I don't have Spider-Man 2 on disc. I don't have Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart on disc, or God of War Ragnarok, even though those are three of my all-time favorite games. I think they're some of the best games that PlayStation has made. I don't have them physically, but I do have God of War, because of course I do. And I will go back and collect the PS5 games when we get to my PS5. I don't think we've even showed a PS5 game so far. When we get to PS5 games, I'm going to make it very clear I would like to collect all the PS5 games, but they're also still new, so they're kind of expensive. So I'm not really doing that right now, but I love God of War. That's the point. That's the point of this whole bit. I love God of War. I also have God of War 3 on PS3. This is apparently a really impressive, one of the biggest exclusives on the system in terms of critical acclaim, and people are really excited for it, but I've not gone back and played any of the pre-2018 God of War games. I really like to, but the more character action, DMC Bayonetta style of the older God of War games doesn't appeal to me as much as the more story-driven new duology, but I'm sure this game is very good. I'm sure it's very impressive, but of course I have it because it's God of War and I'm a sicko. But yeah, I'll get around to it. Now here is the perfect time for me to plug my recently uploaded video about every PlayStation Studio explained. I opened that video talking about every PlayStation Studio with this team, Polyphony Digital, the creator of the Gran Turismo series of games. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because I'm not a racing guy. I have a little more information in that video if you want to go learn about the history of that company. They're the oldest team that Sony still has under their umbrella, and this is the longest running series in PlayStation history. And I have Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec on PS2. I got Gran Turismo 4 on PS2. And I have, well, actually, I'll save this one for last. I have Gran Turismo Sport on PS4, which is the only PS4 exclusive Gran Turismo game. It really is the seventh Gran Turismo game. And I mean, as far as I know, it's considered a mainline game. I really don't know how it differs, to be honest, and why it wasn't called Gran Turismo 7. And then I have Gran Turismo 5 on PS3. I don't have 6, but I do have another PS3 Gran Turismo game, which is Gran Turismo 5 Prologue. We're taking a long time to make Gran Turismo 5, and so they put this game out on store shelves about a year before, which is just the same game but smaller. This is it's basically a demo for Gran Turismo 5. which is really bizarre that this exists. Just period. But yeah, Gran Turismo. Yippee! All right, let's talk about my newfound fascination with PlayStation's history, which is their sports games. I haven't gotten to MLB. Obviously, that's way farther down the alphabet. But we're in the G section. What's going on here? That's because Gretzky NHL 06 is the next game we're going to be talking about. Again, you want to make sure I know what I'm talking about, look for that orange-yellow diamond in the bottom. This is a Sony game. Let's see. Do I know who developed this? Foster City, yeah. SI Foster City was a team that really no longer exists, but this is a hockey game. If you know Wayne Gretzky, I'm not into hockey, but I am into Sony, and I am into PlayStation and PlayStation history. And one thing that most people don't know is that Sony used to publish all sorts of sports games. They had 99 Sports, Red Zone Interactive. These were two teams that made lots of sports games. They were merged eventually into San Diego Studio, which makes the MLB The Show series that we'll get to later. But this is a hockey game. They used to do hockey games. They used to do basketball games. They used to do football games. We'll talk about a couple of those later. But did you know that Sony used to make and publish hockey games? I didn't until about a month ago. And this is called Gretzky NHL 06. So that is a fascinating part and forgotten part of PlayStation history. Heavenly Sword. That's the next game we're talking about. This is one of the really early PS3 exclusives. This was developed by Ninja Theory, that you'll now know for the Hellblade series. But this was kind of a Devil May Cry style game that was a Sony exclusive and published early in the PS3's life cycle. It stars Nariko, this red-headed female action hero here, who was in PlayStation AllStars Battle Royale. That is how I learned about this game. That is the only reason I know about this game, or have known about this game as long as I have. I haven't heard any particularly great things about it, but it is an interesting one-off IP from a team of reasonable repute. They're now owned by Microsoft, who pays for their games and publishes the Hellblade series, or published Hellblade 2 at least. But yeah, Heavenly Sword, kind of a interesting mix of something we now know as an Xbox studio and a PlayStation game, because this was published and owned. The IP is owned by PlayStation. So Heavenly Sword, go play it. But it's not the only PS3 Sony game with an HEA at the beginning. Or no, an HEAV, because Heavy Rain is up next. This is the first game that Quantic Dream made with Sony. And this is I guess it's kind of an iconic PS3 game. I would say that a lot of people know the press X to Jason meme.
Jason! Jason!
And maybe recognize this origami killer, origami bit. I played Heavy Rain. I like story-driven games and cinematic games, and so that from that direction, it appeals to me. I think that Quantic Dream does QuickTime events better than anyone else. They kind of use the whole controller in a very interesting way. But if you want to play a Quantic Dream game, I would say go play Detroit Become Human. I actually love that game, and frankly I'm a little bit disappointed in myself that it's the only Quantic Dream Sony game I don't have a physical copy of. But Heavy Rain's okay, but when you start to think about the story, a lot of things don't make any sense, and it's kind of poorly written, and none of the characters are particularly memorable. I like Scott Shelby, but Heavy Rain's okay. Press X to Jason is really the only thing this game's got going for it, though. Go play Detroit Become Human. Another PSVR game that you probably have never heard of is Hidden Agenda for PS4. Again, we talked about Bravo Team earlier. Developed by Supermassive Games. What were they doing? They made a lot of games, apparently. And they still do, with the, what's that horror series they do? Can't remember off the top of my head. There's a bunch of those. Man of Medan. Yeah, but this is, I think this is a horror game. More of a horror, so more in their wheelhouse for PSVR, which is a cool idea to make PSVR games, horror games. Supermassive. But I also wanted to point out that this is a PlayLink game. And this is, I think this might be the only PlayLink game I have. PlayLink is really only something I found out about recently, but this is kind of the last casual initiative that Sony ever did, has done since then. I mean, they might do one in the future, but PlayLink was, you can connect PS4 games to phones and play like with other people on they're playing on their phones and stuff, kind of like Jackbox style thing. I really have no idea what that means for Hidden Agenda. There are some other PlayLink games that I have not gone to collect yet, but I would like to. But yeah, just thought I'd mention PlayLink, because in the lineage of things like EyeToy, like PS Move, like Wonderbook, which we'll get to later, PlayLink is kind of the last in the lineage of that so far. And it's very interesting that this game is a combination of PlayLink, PSVR, and Supermassive Games, and Sony. Yes. as I was saying earlier, the yellow diamond does not show up on the cover of PS4 games. They stopped doing it there, which I think is a little bit of a disappointment. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Or you can look in the back and see the yellow diamond there. They still do put the yellow diamond on their boxes. So that's how you can tell a PS4, PS5 game is published by Sony. But yeah, Hidden Agenda. Haven't played it, but PlayLink is interesting. PSVR is interesting, and Supermassive is interesting. Horizon Zero Dawn, up next. Horizon is in an interesting place now that it is the dominant PlayStation series, I would say. It's certainly the series that they have with the most games in development. This is a very good game, though. Don't let people saying that Aloy is boring or that they're oversaturating the series distract from the fact that Horizon Zero Dawn is a very good, original IP, really well made, really unique game. I think this is a phenomenal game. I was actually really surprised by how much I love the lore and the story, and the visuals are fantastic. The art direction is incredible. I have not played Forbidden West yet. I just assume I'll like that more once I get around to it. And I haven't played Call of the Mountain because I don't have PSVR 2, but I will be getting LEGO Horizon Adventures coming out later this year, and I'm interested to see what they do. There's apparently a multiplayer game in the works at Guerrilla. There's an MMO, I think, and NCSoft is supposed to be making that, so there are a lot of Horizon games, but this is the one that started it all, and I would consider this maybe... It's not certainly not my favorite PS4 game, but maybe the definitive PS4 game, just in that it seems to have shifted the direction of Sony so much, and obviously totally reinvented Guerrilla Studios. And also, part of the reason why the series is so popular and getting so many entries is the person that was at the head of Guerrilla Studios when this game was being made is Herman Hulst, who then went on to become head of PlayStation Worldwide Studios, and now is even higher as CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment. So Horizon is just a great game, though. I give you a lot of history, I give you a lot of tidbits, and we talk about the rest of the series, but Horizon Zero Dawn is still a very good game. I believe apparently there's a remake of this game, which is a little bit ridiculous, coming out, but I'm sure that'll be an even better version of this game. So go try Horizon. Don't let the weird naysayers convince you otherwise. Earlier, when I held up Everybody's Golf, I was saying the name Hot Shots Golf quite a bit, and that's because that's what the series used to be called in the US. It was called Everybody's Golf Everywhere Else for the entire history of that series, but I do have some other Everybody's Golf / Hot Shots Golf games. I have Hot Shots Golf 3 for PS2. I've got Hot Shots Golf 4, FORE, which is kind of funny, coming in the mail soon, but I don't have that here to show you guys. Might show you it later if I get it in and can add the clip. But also, there are PSP games, Hot Shots Golf Open T, Hot Shots Golf Open T2, and there was a sub-series or a side series of the Hot Shots Golf series called Hot Shots Tennis. And this is Hot Shots Tennis Get a Grip for PSP. There is a Hot Shots Tennis on PS2 as well. I do not have that. But very interesting series that was obviously incredibly prolific, and the relationship that Sony and Sony Japan had with Clap Hands, the people that made all these games, was... I mean, obviously, they loved making them, and they were very good at them, and people liked these games. They made a shitload of them. So I'd love to have every Hot Shots Golf game, not because I care a lot. And there is a PS Vita game called Hot Shots Golf World Invitational. This is the only one of these games that I've played, and I actually kind of like this game. I'm not very good at it. It's surprisingly difficult for what appears to be kind of a casual, colorful Sony golf game, but I played the first few sets of cups, and it was a reasonably good time. I'm interested to see some of the other games. I really do want to play the PS4 one and see how it differs from this game, because these came out sort of not back to back, but certainly close to each other. But yeah, it's just interesting that this series is just gone, and it was around since the PS1. I mean, this is technically a really iconic and long-running PlayStation series, and now it's just gone. Here's the first collection I'm talking about today, the Ico and Shadow of the Colossus collection for PS3. I actually do have both of these games physically otherwise, which I'll show you copies of me holding them. I don't have them with me right now, which is why I'm going to be delaying. And you'll maybe notice that throughout the video. There are a couple that I have at my parents' place that I didn't bother to take with me to my own house. And I should have. I regret it, but you will see pictures of me holding them, so you know that I'm not lying to you. But Ico and the Shadow of the Colossus, 2 games made by Fumito Ueda and at Studio Japan. Team Ico is the studio that he ran within Studio Japan that made these games, and I really love both Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. This collection is totally solid. This is how I played Shadow of the Colossus for the first time, and I really, really loved it. But both of these, but Ico is available on PS Plus Premium, and I played Ico on there, and it was totally fine on there, even though it is this version, so it's streaming, and people say, oh, it's bad, but I was fine for me. But yeah, very sad that Sony and Fumito Ueda have ended their relationship. We'll talk about Last Guardian later. That was the last game they made together. But these are 2 massively iconic PS2 games. two of the games that kind of early games that people considered games as art. I would totally agree. I think these games are both fantastic. Eco looks like paintings. Thematically, both these games are very interesting, intertwining gameplay and theme in very unique ways, especially for the PS2. Go seek out and play both of these games. There's a Bluepoint Games remake of Shadow of the Colossus on PS4 that came out in 2018. That would probably be the way to play this game. The original Shadow of the Colossus is very janky. And Eco is, as I said, available on PS Plus, and just play it there. It's totally fine, but it's a really, really goddamn good game. Earlier, I talked about Ghost of Tsushima, and that was from Sucker Punch Productions, who I would say is maybe best known, or at least more modernly known, for the Infamous series of games. Yippee! I love Infamous. Infamous 1 is a game that I really, really adore. I almost platinumed that game. I spent a lot of time on PS3 in that game. I have only played a little bit of Infamous 2, but I'm sure if I really got into it, I would think it's even better than Infamous. And then Infamous Second Son, this was an early PS4 game. A different main character from the other two. This features Cole McGrath. In this game, it features Delson Rowe, who has kind of like more ash smoke powers, whereas our boy Cole here has electricity powers. But these games are interesting in that they're just kind of open world, jump around, shoot some stuff, fight some bad guys games, but they have a morality system, so you can choose on certain missions. Do you want to go good? Do you want to go bad? Do you want your electricity to turn blue? Do you want it to turn red? You get a couple different powers and different story beats from that. I'd say that's what the Infamous series is probably most known for, is its powers. Some solid movement, not great movement. It's certainly better in Infamous Second Son here, and in the morality system. But yeah, I like the Infamous series a lot. I don't really think that I need it to come back. One thing that you'll notice about me, even though I'm really passionate about Sony's history, I actually think that it's kind of a good thing that they continue to move on. Obviously, there are some series like God of War and Gran Turismo that they keep around for a while, but I like it when there are just chunks of PlayStation history, and each given studio is able to move on to a new IP and add to that legacy. And so Sucker Punch has said that they're not really interested in going back to Infamous, and I think that's totally fine. We got 3 very good games. You can play these games. They're still good to play. And now they're on Ghost of Tsushima, and I hope that Ghost of Tsushima doesn't last like 15 years. They're making a movie. They're making a sequel, so it might. But I like Infamous, and I'm glad that they are leaving it to rest, because a trilogy of solid games plus a couple of expansions is perfect. I mean, I don't love this game. I think it's totally good, so I would have been fine if it just stayed with the 2 Infamous games on PS3. But yeah, go play Infamous, and don't be too sad that Sucker Punch is no longer making these games. We keep talking about them. PSVR games, surprisingly made by Supermassive Games. This is the Inpatient. Now, this is definitely a horror game. I was a little bit confused about Hidden Agenda earlier. I honestly really don't know that much about that game. But the Inpatient is definitely a horror game made by Supermassive Games, published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. I don't have anything more to say about it because I talked about how interesting it was earlier. But continuing the legacy of Supermassive PSVR titles, that's bizarre. We talked about Daxter earlier. Now let's talk about Jak. I've got a couple of Jak and Daxter games here. I also do, and you'll see them, own Jak and Daxter The Precursor Legacy and Jak 2, I guess it's called. But here is Jak 3 and Jak X Combat Racing. The only Jak and Daxter game I don't have is Jak and Daxter The Lost Frontier, which is made by a totally different studio, not by Naughty Dog. I guess I could have mentioned that earlier. Oh no, wait, I didn't, because Daxter was not made by Naughty Dog. But these are, I guess, the first Naughty Dog games we're talking about today. I love Naughty Dog, and I like Jak and Daxter a lot. Though the only game in the series I've played is Precursor Legacy, I'm very interested to explore Jak 2, Jak 3, Jak X, Daxter, maybe Lost Frontier if I eventually get that. But yeah, Jak and Daxter. This, again, it's been a while since we talked about it. Racing games. It's old, weird Sony racing games. Why is there a Jak and Daxter racing game? That's so weird. And apparently it was playable with online. I mean, that's crazy. Who remembers this game? But it and it's kind of got like a Zack Snyder gritty, realistic like Batmobile thing going on there. I mean, this is just a weird series that kind of quote unquote devolved into like more darker, gritty storytelling. But I like Jak and Daxter, the first one, a lot, so I really like to get to these games in the future. And I do have basically all of them. I think in some way this might be the most obscure game that I have. It's not like demonstrable, but what the hell is Jet X2O? Again, another racing game from Sony on the PS2. And nobody remembers this game. I was looking at this game, and I believe I found it when I was like at a game store. And I saw this in the corner. I was like, "Are you serious? Jet X2O. This is not an IP of any relevance. Looks like it's on the back. It shows like what do you call those? Jet skis. I guess that makes sense with jet in the title. Jet ski racing with this really, really freaky guy. Can you focus, camera? On the front there, published by Sony, but just gone to time. I've never played it. I'm slowly working my way through the just ridiculous racing game history that Sony has. I'll get to it, but it's just bizarre. And this is the perfect kind of game that I wanted to make this video for, of just things that I own because Sony published them, and I know about because Sony published them, that most people do not know about. And so hopefully through watching this video and seeing me hold up a game like X2O, you learn something about PlayStation's history, learn that it's not just Gran Turismo, God of War, Horizon, Spider-Man all the way down. There are some weird hidden gems, and I don't know if this game is good or not, but it's definitely bizarre. Another PS3 collection. The only way to get Journey physically is this Journey collection on PS3, which I think is also the only way to get Flower and Flow physically. This is how I played Journey. This is how I played Flower for the first time, and I love both of these games. They are two of my favorite games of all time. That game company, the team that makes them, also made Sky, which I also love. I gotta give Flow another shot. I played it for like an hour and I didn't really enjoy it, but I think it's really cool that these three originally digital-only games published by Sony were put in a collection, so there is some physical preservation of these games. They're not just lost to time through being only PSN games. This is a really cool collection. Journey, obviously an iconic game. I think I actually prefer Flower. I love both those games, but the green fields aesthetic of this game really, really appeals to me. I've had a flower image from that game as my desktop wallpaper for a long, long time, but iconic games, love both these games. Got to give Flow another shot, but this is a really cool collection. So if you're into PlayStation history and PSN games, this is one to seek out. Let's next talk about the series that was at Guerrilla Games before they shifted apparently totally to Horizon, which is Killzone. I've never touched any of these games. I'm sure I would enjoy them to a certain degree, but they are one that I was interested in collecting because none of them are particularly expensive. But there were a bunch of them. I'm only missing the PS Vita game, Killzone. I don't remember what the PS Vita one is called, but I have the Burning Skies. That's what it does. Resistance Burning Skies. I think it's more of a plane game. You know what? I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I do know that I own Killzone. I do know that I own Killzone 2 on PS3, Killzone Liberation on PSP, Killzone 3 on PS3 as well, with PlayStation Move support, and Jesus Christ, just a lot of stuff on the front there. You got the ESRB rating, you got the Guerrilla Games logo, you got PlayStation Network, you got playable with 3D TVs. That was a thing they were trying to push in I think E3 2010. They made a big stink about making PS3 games that were compatible with 3D TVs. That went by the wayside. We got the Sony Interactive Entertainment publishing thing there. Early access to the SOCOM 4 beta. That's awesome. And then GameSpot, one of Best of E3 winner. Best shooter, best PS3 game. So, man, they really wanted people to care about Killzone. And some people do. But I think Killzone, and of course Killzone Shadowfall, launch game for PS4. I think that Killzone is much like Infamous, another perfect example of... They made a bunch of these games. It's very cool that Sony had a shooter series that they put a lot of effort into, and Guerrilla, obviously, this is where they found most of their history to be had. But I think it's okay that Killzone is not back. I'd like these games to be more accessible. I don't think any of them. I think actually only Killzone Liberation, the PSP one, is available on PS Plus Premium. So it's a shame that and Shadowfall. It's a shame that most of these series is not available to play on modern hardware. But I don't think I need another Killzone game. Again, I haven't played them, so maybe if I played them and I really loved them, I'd be a little more upset that Horizon is taking over Guerrilla. But let the past die to a certain extent. Be interested in it, research it, but don't be too upset that a game with our series with 6 entries, and also like there's a PS3 remake made by Supermassive Games on PS3. It had a lot of entries. It lived a good life. So let's move on to Horizon, is what I'm saying. So earlier we talked about God of War and how Sony Santa Monica has made God of War 2018, God of War 3, other God of War games, Ragnarok, but the only non-God of War game they have ever published to this point in history was their very first game, another racing game called Kinetica. Kinetica. Do you know about Kinetica? I didn't know about Kinetica, and honestly, I think Kinetica discovering that this was an early PS2 game, that this was the first game made by the team that has since been known only for the God of War series, is maybe what inspired me to be so interested in PlayStation history, because it's these pockets of PlayStation's history that really make it a fascinating legacy to discover. Is you think you know Sony Santa Monica, and then you look back and you realize they made a racing game, a really weird racing game. It's kind of this anti-grav racing game where it's in this futuristic world where the people are like augmented cybernetically to like turn themselves kind of into cars a little bit, and they can drive up walls and on ceilings, and also it's like kind of sexy. A lot of the characters have like just basically their boobs hanging out. It's bizarre. It's a bizarre game that is just totally lost to time, and because it's developed by Sony Santa Monica, who is a well-known name, it's fascinating to see that there are these elements of their history that have just gone forgotten. And so Kinetica is on PS Plus Premium. That is where I played it for the first time. And I would recommend people trying it out just for a little bit, just to kind of, again, with all of this, educate yourself about PlayStation's history. And just knowing about Kinetica is not going to really get you anywhere in life, but it's fun to know. It's a fun trivia bit to pull out. He's like, hey, everyone knows God of War Ragnarok. You know, the first game they made was called Kinetica, where there was like sexy half racer car people on walls. I mean, it's just weird. And it's so much fun to learn about. It's Knack time, baby. Knack 1, Knack 2, PS4. These are the only games developed by Mark Cerny. He directed both these games. Mark Cerny, if you don't know, has been a part of PlayStation's history for a long time, helping to produce a lot of games, including even Crash Bandicoot. I mean, he goes back that far to PS1. But he's now the architect for the architecture or hardware of PS4 and PS5. And so he's obviously very instrumental to the history of the company. But he doesn't really lead the development on many games. But he did do 2 games. And one of them was the launch game Knack. And this game is really bad. I played Knack. And it's just, I mean, it's not a surprise to anyone, but Knack is really, really bad. I have not played Knack 2 yet. I assume it's better, and I'd like to. I'm just a sick bastard. Like, I'm the kind of guy that thinks about the fact that I haven't played Knack 2. But Knack is a massive meme. And for good reason. This is kind of what they pushed at launch for this system. I guess they kind of wanted it to be like a new mascot. It being directed by Mark Cerny is really fascinating. But this is a series that's like 2 games on PS4. We don't need another Knack game. We're done. Just let it sit there. Let it be a funny part of PlayStation's history. And it is. Another funny part of PlayStation's history is PlayStation Move, as I mentioned earlier with the fight Lights Out. But what about Kung Fu Rider? This is another weird PS Move game. You play as this office worker guy riding down a hill on an office chair, and you do Kung Fu. While you're doing this, you like grind on rails on the office chair and kick trash cans and kick people. And I mean, that's just bizarre. It's just weird. And PlayStation Move has a lot of these just like original IP, totally forgotten games that are really interesting to learn about. And PS Move is another thing that's pretty easy to collect for. None of these games are particularly expensive. If you want to get the Move controllers, they're going to be a little bit more expensive. I'm lucky in that I got my Move controllers with my PSVR from Abrams, so I didn't buy them separately. But I find these kind of games really, really fascinating. And this is just a really interesting idea for a motion-controlled video game. Riding down a hill on an office chair, that's just weird. Let's talk about Lair. I have played this game. This is another one of those early forgotten PS3 exclusives. And this game was intended to show off the 6-axis, which was the motion control of the PS3 controller, which is kind of what set it apart from the PS2 controller, which is 6-axis, like tilt controls. And Lair is a dragon combat game. You ride on a dragon and you fly around. So it's kind of like Star Fox, just if you want to think of like flying around aerial combat sort of thing. And this game is not very good, and it's not very good because it doesn't run very well. The idea is totally fine. I like motion controls enough. The motion controls are not perfect here, but it's early, so I don't really fault the game for that. But this game is just way too ambitious. I believe Factor 5, yes, the dev team that made this, I believe this is the last game that they made, and they shut down, which is sad, and it happens. Occasionally we talk about Blood and Truth earlier. That was kind of the game that led to that studio getting shut down. Evolution with Driveclub. But Lair is one of those where it's just forgotten and it's not great. But I really do think that if it had been given a second shot later in the PS3 generation, or even for something like PSVR, with better tilt controls, with hardware or better development that optimizes the game to run a little bit better, it really is just kind of janky and has bad frame rate. But it is interesting, which is really, at the end of the day, all I care about. Earlier I mentioned Eco, Shadow of the Colossus. The Last Guardian is the last part of that Team Eco, Fumito Ueda, Sony trilogy, kind of. And this is definitely my least favorite of the three. It's the only one I haven't finished, just because if you know about this game, you know that Trico, this dog bird guy here, dog cat bird guy, he has kind of his own AI, and it's a very cool and innovative thing to do, but it makes this game kind of frustrating to play through in the way that the spectacle of Shadow of the Colossus, climbing the Colossi can be a little bit janky, but it still feels epic, and the intimate connection that you have with Yorda in Eco works very well. Trico is cute, he's cool, it's very, very innovative that they did this, but it makes the game not particularly fun to play. But I do like that this game eventually came out. It was in development forever and shifted from PS3 to PS4. In the middle of developing this game, Fumito Ueda left Team Eco, made his own team called Gen Design, who are still around. Their new game, as far as I know, I mean, we don't know much about it, is being published by Epic, I think, who make Fortnite, if that's still even going through. But Fumito Ueda, amazing artist, very interesting creative, but Last Guardian did not quite work for me. But what does work for me is Naughty Dog, and particularly my favorite series of theirs, The Last of Us. We've got The Last of Us here on PS3, maybe the most definitive PlayStation game, most important PlayStation game of the last 10 years, maybe more. Obviously, the popularity of this game, winning Game of the Year a bunch, and getting a TV show, and getting a sequel, as we'll talk about, has really shaped the history of PlayStation's modern lineage in that, I mean, kind of everyone's trying to make a Last of Us now. God of War is kind of a Last of Us since 2018. There certainly are the more like walk and talk, slow cinematic, more like movie-like elements to a lot of PlayStation's legacy in the modern era, which is fine by me because I love this game and I love basically every game in that style that Sony has published. And this is obviously a very important, iconic game, but this one is the better version, Last of Us Remastered on, ooh, that's interesting. This might also be kind of a, not Japanese, like a, so this French? I don't know. It's got another language on it. I didn't notice that. That's interesting. This is a better version of this game. It just looks a little bit better, runs a little bit better. But really, it's Last of Us 2 that I love. This was one of my favorite games of all time for a very long time, and it still is. It's probably in my top 50 or something like that. But The Last of Us 2, I think is the best game ever made. I mean, the story of this game, I just think is phenomenal. I think all the performances are phenomenal. I think the combat is phenomenal. I think the environment design goes so overlooked, how varied the environments are. And I like it how bold it is. I even like Abby more than Ellie, and I love Ellie, and Yara, and Lev, and Clive, and Owen, and gosh, I just adore this game. And I'm really interested to see what they do next. It's very unfortunate that Naughty Dog has been put in a really weird place where they've gone half quiet for a while and had a major project canceled. But this is, I think, one of the pinnacles of the industry for me personally. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can top this. I think they did, from maybe one of the best games of all time for almost an entire decade with The Last of Us. I think they one-upped themselves with The Last of Us Part 2. And of course, there is The Last of Us Part 1, a remake of this game on PS5. There's a remake of this game on PS5 called The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. The Last of Us is in a weird place because, much like Horizon, it is oversaturated in a way, but every game in the series has been great. So I don't have a problem with it. These are two of my favorite games of all time, and I think they only get better. So I'm interested to see what Naughty Dog does next. Let's talk about another iconic and long-running PlayStation series, LittleBigPlanet. I love Sackboy. I love the style and the aesthetic and the just ethos of the LittleBigPlanet series. The way the first game opens is this British guy voicing this thing of like, when everyone dreams, their dreams and ideas and creativity float up and make this creative world of patch characters and whimsy and ridiculousness. And I that just tickles me in the way that like Toy Story tickles me. And so I've played this game. I really like it. I've actually not played the follow-up, LittleBigPlanet 2, which I've heard is just better. And I have not played LittleBigPlanet 3 either, which was these first two games were made by Media Molecule, who made Dreams that we talked about earlier. And this game was made by Sumo Digital, who we'll also talk about a little bit later. But as far as I know, people consider it the worst of the trilogy. I don't know how I would feel because, as I mentioned earlier, with the sort of creating elements, I'm not really into it. So they're just kind of fun, creative platformers to me. And then there was also a LittleBigPlanet karting. Racing games! Sony racing games! They published so many racing games, including a karting spinoff for freaking LittleBigPlanet. And nobody knows about this. Also, PlayStation Move compatible. I don't even really know what that means, to be honest. But I like LittleBigPlanet. This is one of the only there are very few Sony series that stay around for multiple generations, and obviously at this point, Little Big Planet has been around for 3 generations. The only games that I do not have in this series, we'll get to Sackboy Big Adventure later, but I don't have the PSP and PS Vita ones. I'd like to. And if you're watching this video and you're like, oh, why doesn't he have this? Why doesn't he have that? Just know that I want to have insert this game. If it's published by Sony, I'm interested in owning it at a certain point in my life, but I don't make that much money, and I obviously buy enough. I buy plenty, so I'll get to them eventually. From Little Big Planet to Little Deviants. You want to talk about a game that didn't do well and killed a Sony studio? Little Deviants is the perfect example of that. Developed by Big there on the back there. This is kind of a mini game sort of collection thing. You play as a bunch of different little goopy guys, and each one has kind of their own gameplay style. I beat this game on PS Vita. I believe this was a PS Vita launch game, or at least close to it. But it didn't do very well, and it wasn't very good. And the studio Big that made this game, even though Sony had owned them for 10 years, I think at this point, or more than that, it closed down the studio. And I think that's really unfortunate, not because I particularly love Little Deviants. I have a soft spot for it in the way that I have a soft spot for something like Jet X2O, because it's just weird. It's just a Sony published IP, unique for PS Vita, uses all of the weird gimmicks. Oh, I guess I could hold up my PS Vita here. I brought down my PSP and PS Vita for prop comedy, and I never ended up holding them up. But there's a touchpad on the back here. There's a camera on the front there. You got a microphone. You got a touchscreen on the front. And Little Deviants definitely uses all of that. And it can feel gimmicky, but I kind of like gimmicky. I'm a Wii fan. I like Wii U. I like DS. So PS Vita and some of the other weirder parts of Sony's history kind of fall into that Nintendo-esque era or ethos. And Little Deviants is not a very good game, but it's definitely an example of that. But what's really an example of Sony being weird is Loco Roco. Insert picture of me holding my other copy of Loco Roco 1 here, but this is Loco Roco 2. 2 games for the Sony PSP. I love Loco Roco. 2D platformers are a genre that I enjoy, but when it's straight up 2D platforming, like some of the older Mario games or Sonic games, I feel like I need a little bit more to set itself apart, and Loco Roco absolutely does that. You do not control the little blobby guys by jumping. You control them by moving the world around. You press down the L1 and R1 buttons, and you go boop, and then the world goes down and then goes up, and you tilt the world with the different bumpers. That's just so weird. It's so creative, and the art style of this game and the music that's kind of like children singing, I think is just phenomenal. And both of the remastered versions are available on PlayStation, on PS5. They're not essential. They might be extra, but they're certainly in premium if it's neither of those. But I don't know if I recommend playing them on PS5 or PS4, because these games work so well on a handheld that is tiltable, because you're tilting the world. And so if it's up on a big TV, I think it might give you like a little bit of like vertigo almost. But I have a PS Portal, and I was playing Loco Roco 2 remastered on my PS Portal, and that's good because that's a handheld system. And so, but still, play these games if you haven't. Just in general, I think they're great. And they're one of my favorite kind of forgotten weird Sony series is the Loco Roco series. I absolutely adore these games. I also do like these games were not published physically, so I don't have copies of them, but there are 2 spin-offs, Loco Roco Midnight Carnival and Loco Roco Coco Reco. Those are both PS3 PlayStation Network games. I don't like either of them nearly as much. Midnight Carnival is like a hard Loco Roco game, and I just find that kind of annoying. And Coco Reco is like a interactive screensaver almost, but just weird series. Thank you, Studio Japan, for making weirdo shit. Let's talk about a game from a Sony studio we have yet to mention today. That's Zipper Interactive, who made MAG. This is a online-only game. MAG stands for Massive Action Game. And it was a 256-person online multiplayer shooter. I mean, that's just amazing that they tried that, let alone tried it in the PS3, Xbox 360 era, when, yeah, multiplayer games were popular, but there weren't many that were that big. And certainly, to this day, there really aren't games that try 200 plus. Battlefield 2042, anyone? That game did not work. But MAG is one of those just big online war shooters, and it's obviously shut down by now. The PS3 servers don't really work too well, and this game didn't do very well because it's very hard to get a pool of almost 300 players into one match. But this is from Zipper, as I mentioned, who made the SOCOM series that we'll talk about later. But it was the failure of this game and a game they made for the Vita called Unit 13 that ended their studio closure. We're talking about quite a few teams back to back here. Studio Japan, Big Evolution, that London studio that have been shut down. And I find those studio closures to be unfortunate because with people like Big Evolution, London studio, Zipper Interactive, they were bringing very different genres to the PlayStation ecosystem in the way that some of Sony's teams currently do. Media Molecule, Team Itsobi, they make weird games, but it's sad that some of the series that, or some of the developers that weren't making just action games, like over the shoulder action games, got shut down. And I don't know if MAG is any good. I don't think I can play it anymore. And we'll get to a couple more of those PS3 games you can't play anymore soon. But MAG is just a weird part of Sony's history because it was very, very ambitious, but it was so ambitious and to the point where it closed down the studio. So that's a little unfortunate. It's Spider-Man time. Marvel Spider-Man for PS4, and we're putting these under M because the official name of both these games and Marvel Spider-Man PS2 is Marvel Spider-Man. I just call him Spider-Man colloquially. I'll call this game Miles Morales, probably in the rest of this video if I'm ever referring to it. But I love Insomniac. I don't even think we've talked about Insomniac yet today, but these Spider-Man games are so good. This was the first game I ever platinumed. I mean, I remember going to the GameStop midnight line to get this game, and someone was dressed up as Spider-Man. I got a picture of me holding my copy with the guy dressed as Spider-Man next to me. This game is just fantastic. And then 2 years later, an Insomniac B team made a game that is arguably better. I think I still prefer this game just because of the scope of it, but Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales looks better. I played it on PS5. This game looks fantastic. The lighting is so good. Miles is such an interesting character. The way they expand his moveset with electricity powers and invisibility is just fantastic. Both these games are great. Obviously, the swinging is great. I love the score for these games. The dynamic score that comes in and out as you're like swinging down. I love the villains. I love all the performances. Naji Jeter and Yuri Lowenthal playing Miles and Peter respectively. Just fantastic. And then this is where I would hold my Marvel Spider-Man 2 if I had one. But I don't because I split the cost of that game digitally with a couple friends. But oh my god, I think Marvel Spider-Man 2 is even better than the other ones. I think Insomniac just continues to one-up themselves, and so I'm so excited to see what they do down the line. This is a perfect example of I'm a little worried about them getting too stuck into the Marvel hole. I think every game that they've made has been good, like I think for Guerrilla with Horizon and Naughty Dog with Last of Us, but they are making so many of these games, it's a little bit overwhelming, but I also love all these games, and so go play all of them. They're all great. They're all great platinums. This one's a little bit annoying because you have to play it twice for the platinum, but it's still a great game. And also, interestingly enough, if we can tell a little bit of a difference here, we talked about how the yellow diamond on the front is a good way to denote that Sony published the game. Now, a good way to note is if it has PlayStation Studios on the front. Instead of PlayStation Worldwide Studios, now their teams are called PlayStation Studios. That doesn't really make much of a difference, but if you see this white PlayStation cube here in the side or square, that's a good way to tell on PS5 if it is a Sony-developed game. More move stuff. Medieval moves, to be specific. Deadman's Quest. Interesting that this is not a medieval game. The medieval game on PS1, 1 and 2, and then there's a PS4 remake of the first game, and then a PSP remake of the first game as well, I think. This is another Sony-published skeleton game called Medieval. Called Medieval. That is a PlayStation Move kind of minigame combat game, action game. I haven't played this game, but it is, again, bizarre. I guess this is Deadmond? Maybe? But why is that not Sir Daniel Fortescue? Why is this not literally a medieval game? It kind of is, but it also isn't. Another weird part of PlayStation Move's insane legacy of making new IPs that are totally forgotten in time. But a series that is not forgotten in time is the MLB series of games. I do not have all of them here because that would be a little ridiculous, though I want all of them eventually. Sony San Diego has been making MLB The Show for a while, for 20 years at this point, but it wasn't always called MLB The Show. It used to just be called MLB. You see the first few here, MLB 2004, MLB 2005, and MLB 2006. There's also a PSP version of this same game, I believe. But then, in 2006 as well, MLB The Show starts. MLB 06, The Show. And then partway through the series history, they shift the name from MLB The Show, MLB insert number here, The Show, to MLB The Show, number of the year. I don't know why they changed it. People call it The Show, or MLB The Show, so I think that makes more sense than MLB insert number here, The Show. But yeah, I'm not into baseball. I'm not into sports, frankly. Again, I find these fascinating because they are Sony published games. Even more fascinating now that they are published on other competing hardware. The MLB The Show series is actually on Game Pass. MLB The Show 24 is on Game Pass, and that's where me and my friends played it on Xbox. It's on Switch too. I mean, it's just nuts. But this is the perfect example of they found a niche. They have a studio that does this niche very well. This is the dominant baseball series in the video game industry, and they've been doing it on a yearly basis. How many do I have here? I've got 4. I've got 8 of the 20-something games in the series. So eventually, I'd like to own a copy of one of each game. I don't need the PS2 version and the PS3 version and the PSP version or something like that. But I don't have any particular affinity for the MLB series because I don't have an affinity for baseball. But I like that Sony publishes sports games still. And this is the only one that is sticking around after we talk about Gretzky is gone, and then we'll talk about a couple more coming up. But these, they put them out every year, and they're always at least pretty good. And you can play them on Xbox Game Pass. It feels like home, coming back to talk about another forgotten PlayStation published racing series, the Mod Nation Racer series. And actually interesting that we talked about this back to back with MLB The Show, because Sony San Diego, the team that makes the MLB The Show series and has for a long time, and that's what mostly they do, they actually made these games. I think they worked with a couple other teams to work on them. United Front Games made this first one, but the Mod Nation Racers series is just a kart racing series, which is funny that they also put out LittleBigPlanet karting in like the same time frame. But this also has a version on PSP, I believe. I'm not sure if it's the exact same game, but it's also called Mod Nation Racers. But then there's Mod Nation Racers Road Trip on PS Vita. And I played this game. I thought it was pretty fun, actually. Maybe I'm just getting more into racing games, because over the course of the last month, I've played this and liked it quite a bit, or was surprised how much I liked it. And I've also played ATV recently, and I kind of like that, and Driveclub, and I really like that. So maybe I'm just warming up to racing games, and it's Sony's fault. But Mod Nation Racers, Sony San Diego, forgotten racing series, add it to the pile. I can't get away from them. Sony published forgotten racing series like MotorStorm. This was developed by Evolution, who then went on to make Driveclub. We talked about them closing down, but really what they were known for a long time was the MotorStorm series. These are off-road racing games. I don't think these were published at the same time as the ATV ones, and obviously those are for ATVs, not cars. But yeah, there's a bunch of MotorStorm games. There's also, this is Pacific Rift. This is MotorStorm. There's also Apocalypse, I think, and there's a PSN game called MotorStorm RC. So there's a bunch of these games, and Evolution, I believe, made all of them. I have not played MotorStorm, but I find the idea of the sort of gritty, going all over the track collision element of these games to be more appealing than something like Gran Turismo. So I'd like to get around to these. But again, another studio that closed, and a series that lasted its own period of time. There was enough entries in a short period of time. I don't know why they made 3 MotorStorm games or I guess 4 MotorStorm games on PS3, but yeah, pretty cool. And another racing series published by Sony that is just dead. More forgotten sports series, the NBA series that they published a little bit of. I believe actually these were made by Sony San Diego. They used to make some of the older other sports games, not just the MLB series. And this is another one. This is by 989 Sports. 989 Sports became Sony San Diego in some merger down the line, but they were really the ones that were responsible for the breadth of Sony sports games on PS1 and PS2. 989 Sports. This is NCAA Final Four 2001, and this is NBA 09, the inside. I believe this is the last basketball game they published. I think this game was also on PS3, so I'm a little bit disappointed I have the PS2 version. I don't really care at the end of the day, but yeah, basketball games. We talk about hockey game, talk about baseball games. Now basketball games. There's a bunch of them, and no one remembers that Sony did this. But something else that people have forgotten about is The Order 1886, an early PS4 game that was positioned as a kind of graphical showcase, like a really impressive game that really people didn't like. It kind of went by the wayside very quickly. But I kind of like those weird pockets of Sony history, obviously you can tell. And I really like this game. I platinumed The Order 1886. I think the gunplay is really satisfying. It still looks really good to this day. The team at Ready at Dawn, who made this game, are very talented. This was incubated by Sony Santa Monica. I don't know if it's folks there in the back, which they don't do anymore. They don't incubate other people's games. But Jesus, The Order 1886 is, I think, really, really good and very underrated. Ready at Dawn also were the team that made Daxter, which we talked about earlier, and the PSP spin-offs of God of War series. So they have a history with Sony, but not anymore. And I think because The Order 1886 didn't review particularly well, this is the perfect kind of launch game that is hyped up and is supposed to be like the next big thing that just kind of fails, kind of in the same way Rise Son of Rome did. Obviously it came out around the same time. The Order 86 is another hidden PS4 gem that people don't really talk about. The platinum took me like 13 hours, something like that. Very, very reasonable. Very cheap to get a copy of this. I recommend seeking out The Order 1886, a forgotten part of PS4 history. Really, really fun game. I haven't been into Sony's history for a very long time. I've been lightly into it. I didn't have PlayStations growing up, but it really was the last year or so that I started really digging into the extent that I'm at with PlayStation's history. But the game that inspired me to be interested at all in PlayStation's history and legacy and breadth of IP is PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. And I think it's a crying shame, a crying Jim Ryan shame that this series has not come back. This game's not very good. It's just Smash, but worse. It's Smash at home. But it's really, really interesting that they made a Smash clone. The team of Superbot Entertainment worked alongside Sony Santa Monica's XDev team and Bluepoint Games, which is interesting, to make a Smash clone for PlayStation history. And this game has the big ones, which you need. You got your Nathan Drake, you got your Sackboy, you got your Sly Cooper, you got your Kratos. But then there's Fat Princess. And there's like Toru Inouye and Sir Daniel Fortescue and there's like a stage based on Hot Shots Golf and Patapon and Loco Roco, and I think this is a really cool game in that it is personally important to me, not because I like it, but because it got me interested in PlayStation's history, and because even featuring characters like Nariko from Heavenly Sword, it acts as a really interesting part of PlayStation's history where they really felt cohesive. And the only element of that still remains is in the Astro series through Astro's Playroom and upcoming Astrobot, where they're referencing their lineage and history. Obviously something I have an immense passion for. And I think that a sequel to this game that is just ripping on Smash, you don't got to do the thing where you charge up your supers and then you knock them out. No, we'll just make a Smash clone with PlayStation history and go all out. I mean, they went solidly all out here. You even got like the guy from Starhawk as a DLC character. You got two versions of Cole McGrath, evil Cole McGrath and good Cole McGrath. But I think this game is really cool because of what it represents, not because it's great in and of itself. But yeah, I just really wish Sony cared more about their own history, because it seems like they kind of only half do that. But I'm also really excited for Astrobot because of that reason. Here's a game I've never played, and frankly, know very little about, but this is a perfect example of a one-off, weird Sony IP. Puppeteer, a 2D platformer where you play as this little puppet guy with big scissors and you like snip through the environment. It's really cool. I'm sure I'd love this game, and I'd really, really like to get around to it. Obviously, there's just so many of these games. I play them at a good pace. I promise you I'm playing them. But Puppeteer looks awesome, and this could end up being one of my favorite Sony games, but I just haven't played it yet. But again, another forgotten one-off IP on PS3. There's actually a lot of those. This was made by Japan Studio, and I love Japan Studio's vibe. I think I love the cut of their jib, and it's unfortunate that they're gone. That Team Asobi carries forth that legacy just a little bit, but Puppeteer is the quintessential weird Sony game from PS3. Oh, I love Insomniac, and I also love Ratchet and Clank. Now, I haven't played almost any of the games that I own here. I have played and loved the 2016 sort of reboot remake of Ratchet and Clank. I adore this game. And I also love even more Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart on PS5, which if I had a copy here, I would show it. But this series, obviously, Insomniac, long running, maybe one of the most iconic PlayStation series. They made a bunch of games on PS2. That's where the series started, just a series of straight up 2D action platformers. They also made a sort of more combat focused game. Surprising, they never made a Ratchet racing game, given what they were doing in the PS2 era. And then they continued that forward into PS3 with games like Tools of Destruction and Into the Nexus that are just continuing that legacy forward. They were also called the Future Series. I haven't played these games, so I don't really know what that means. But they also made sort of spin-offs. This is Ratchet and Clank All for One, a 4-player multiplayer game where you play as Ratchet and Clank and Dr. Nefarious and this guy with the chin, Captain Quark. I was about to call him the Mega Chin or whatever. I love Ratchet and Clank, and I really would love to delve into the history of this series with how many goddamn games there are. The only little ones I played are Secret Agent Clank on PSP, which is not very good, and the original Ratchet and Clank, which is very good. So we all know Ratchet and Clank. If you're a PlayStation fan, this is probably a series that you have some sort of affinity for, and I certainly do. And what's so exciting about this is that there's like 20 games or something like that. That's a little bit of exaggeration, but it seems like there's an endless pool for me to always make sure once a year, twice a year, I go back to the Ratchet and Clank well, educate myself a little more, but I always know what I'm getting into, and it's always going to be something cool. I have to offer an apology to Guerrilla Games and the Killzone series. I got things mixed up earlier when I mentioned that the one Killzone game I didn't have was Killzone Burning Skies. That's not a game that existed. I got my wires crossed with Resistance. The Killzone game on Vita is Killzone Mercenary. And now let's talk about Resistance, because Resistance Burning Skies is the one game in the Resistance series that I do not have. Insomniac made these games. We just talked about Ratchet and Clank, and they were also making these games at the same time. Pretty impressive that they made 3 first-person shooter game in one series on one system, on top of all of the PS3 Ratchet games they were making. I've never played these games either, just like Killzone. I love Insomniac, though. I'm sure I would really enjoy these. And there's also a Resistance spinoff on PSP developed by Bend Studio, who made Days Gone, which we talked about earlier. I don't think that this necessarily would recapture the magic that I found in Days Gone, but who knows? I have yet to become a Resistance fan. I obviously have quite a few of these games, not all of them, but very, very cool that Insomniac has a chunk of their history that's in the more shooter space, because they've been so known for Ratchet and now Spider-Man that this Resistance has kind of gone forgotten. But again, perfect example of they made a bunch of them. It was of its time. Let's just move on. A team that is very known for constantly moving on is Housemarque, a team that only recently joined the PlayStation Studios family officially, but of course with Returnal. That was the most recent game they put out. PlayStation Studios there in the corner. I've played a little bit of this game. It's really cool, but Housemarque has a long history with PlayStation with games like Resogun and Super Stardust HD and Matterfall and Alienation, and they've made a bunch of games, but Returnal is really their step into the next level. And their arcade design philosophy can still be felt in this game, even though it is more of a over-the-shoulder third-person action game. This is a very cool game, very unique for PS5, which largely the PS5 Sony exclusive library is kind of samey, but I think this game is really cool, and I'd love to explore more of Housemarque's history. But I also think this might be the only Housemarque game that has a physical copy, because almost everything else was like PSN style games. But so yeah, Housemarque, Returnal, very cool game. Very eager to see what they do next, because I think this is a great framework to build off of, and I'm excited that they're continuing to move on. They're not making a sequel to this. It's going to be a new IP, more than likely. Very, very cool game. This video is the perfect time for me to go through a bunch of Sony studios that have closed. We've talked about a number of them today, but what about Guerrilla Cambridge? Do you know about Guerrilla Cambridge? We talked about Horizon and Killzone from Guerrilla Games, but they had a secondary studio for a little while called Guerrilla Cambridge that made Rigs, Mechanized Combat League. This is a PSVR mech combat arena game. I haven't played it yet. I don't even know if I really can, because it seems to be multiplayer focused, but this is just an interesting part of PlayStation's history, because it was a VR team from a Sony studio that closed down, and no one really talked about Rigs, do they? Here is the newest PlayStation published game that I have, and that is Rise of the Ronin, made by Koei Tecmo and Team Ninja. It is a PlayStation Studios published game, though, because since the teams were renamed to PlayStation Studios also applies to anything that they publish. So even though Koei Tecmo, Team Ninja, they don't own those companies, they do own Rise of the Ronin. I tried it. It kind of just goes to Tsushima at home. It really feels quite similar. There's a few ideas it has, but also for me, it's very, very clear when a game is not made by a Sony team. I think they have a higher bar of quality. And this game is janky, and the animations aren't great, and the storytelling's not great. It's just kind of an average Assassin's Creed style game. And it's interesting that it's sandwiched in between Ghost of Tsushima and a follow-up to that game, because it really does feel similar. It's fine. It's inoffensive, but... And I like that they publish this game, because I like when there's a wider breadth of teams working with Sony, new IP. This is a new IP for PlayStation 5, which has very, very few of those. So I'm sure this game will be very cheap soon. It's still going for $40, $50. I certainly wouldn't have paid $70 for it at launch, which I didn't, thank God. But yeah, I don't have any affinity for this game. I think it's very, very mid. But it's okay to have mid games. I think Sony needs to recognize that. There's a lot of mid games here that we've talked about. I think games should span the gamut. I know you want every game to be the top notch, but I think that quantity is important. Quality is most important, but quantity is important as well. And Rise of the Ronin, I think, kind of reflects that mentality of let's just publish a game. It's not going to set the world on fire. Apparently, it is a Koei Tecmo Team Ninja's best-selling game, though, so good for them. But why am I talking about Rise of the Ronin for this long? It's fine. Our last Little Big Planet game to talk about is Sackboy: Big Adventure. Like Little Big Planet 3, this was made by Sumo Digital. It came out at the launch of PS5. I think cross-gen also with PS4. This is the first 3D platformer in the series of Little Big Planet with a little Sackboy there. I like this game a lot. It is very much a kind of in the same vein ripoff of Mario 3D World, but that game's great. And this game is great too. It has really good multiplayer. It has very good functionality of the DualSense in terms of vibration and adaptive triggers and stuff like that. And it's just cool to see Sony make a 3D platformer like this. Of course, Astro is coming soon, but I want more family-friendly, kid-friendly, younger skewing games from Sony. There's a lot of them we've talked about today, and most of those have just gone by the wayside. But Sackboy: Big Adventure is them still trying a little bit, kind of. And I think this is a very good game. And this is one that goes on sale quite a bit and is reasonably cheap. Looks great on PS5, and I think you should play it. The Shoot is up next. Another PlayStation Move game. You kind of make little movies, and you shoot things with the PlayStation Move controller. Much like the Fight, much like any other, insert any PlayStation Move game we've talked about here. This is just an original IP one-off thing on PlayStation Move. And I'm really going to get into PlayStation Move eventually. I just bought almost all these games like 2 or 3 weeks ago, so I just haven't had the time to get into them. But this one does seem pretty cool. I'm a very big movie guy, and so the idea of like making movies and being on a movie set is very, very cool. I'm sure that allows for quite a bit of variety in the locations and stuff that you're doing. You see a cowboy here and the zombies and like alien stuff. I don't know. This seems cool. But PlayStation Move is just weird, and the Shoot is totally forgotten to time. Maybe Sony's most prolific series that has been forgotten to time is the SingStar series. I've got 6 SingStar games here. That's a lot of SingStar games. This is nowhere near the amount of SingStar games that Sony published. Developed by Sony London Studio, which we talked about earlier with Blood and Truth. They made SingStar games mostly. And also the EyeToy. They made the EyeToy. Let's see what I've got here. I've got SingStar on PS3. Their first game was called SingStar. Then they made another game just called SingStar for PS3. This is SingStar Volume 2. This is SingStar Plus Dance, SingStar Rocks, SingStar's 80s, and SingStar Pop Volume 2. There is a SingStar Pop Volume 1, obviously. There's a SingStar Latino in other countries. There are versions with European bands and versions with German bands and Japanese bands and stuff. And SingStar is, this is like an immensely prolific series. They were putting out multiple a year for over a decade or something like that. The last SingStar game was SingStar Celebration on PS4, and I'd like to have a copy of that. Also, I think that's a PlayLink game where you can use your phone for the microphone. I do have a microphone that works on PS2 and PS3. Cool that's compatible with both. It's just a USB thing. But I'm not a singing guy. I'm not a music guy. But I find this very interesting, that this series was so prolific and was even active up until PS4, but has just gone to the wayside, gone to time, and is really the clear example of Sony not being interested in pursuing more casual style games. This is obviously kind of just like a Just Dance karaoke style game. I think there's also a SingStar guitar game. Pretty interesting series to look into, because there's just like 20 plus of these games. And I don't know if I'll ever collect all of them. I hope I do. But for the moment, I'm good with 6. With MAG earlier, we referenced Zipper Interactive, but SOCOM is their bread and butter, or was their bread and butter. I got SOCOM US Navy SEALs here. I got SOCOM 2 US Navy SEALs here. I got SOCOM 3 US Navy SEALs here. I got SOCOM US Navy SEALs Combined Assault here. SOCOM 4 US Navy SEALs. I'm just saying every game because I think it's funny. And I also have a PSP one called SOCOM US Navy SEALs Fireteam Bravo. There are a couple more on PSP. I think I have all the console ones actually. I think there's a second one on PS3 as well. But yeah, man, look at all these SOCOM games. Jesus Christ. Why were they making these games like yearly? Apparently they sold well enough, but this was Zipper Interactive's bread and butter until they made Unit 13 and MAG, and then they closed down. And so SOCOM is also dead. But man, just look how many games they made, and just representative of the PS2, PSP, PS3 era. More games from Sony. And this guy's making an incredible pog face. I mean, wow, look at that. That's amazing. More weird PS Move stuff. Sorcery. This is a game where you use the PlayStation Move controllers to cast spells, like moving around in different positions. Gives you a fire spell or a ice spell. I don't really know. They did a live tech demo of this on stage when they announced it at E3, and it worked, but kind of didn't work. But just another interesting PS Move game, Sorcery, for PlayStation 3 and PS Move. But in my mind, what PlayStation Move is most known for is being the PlayStation ripoff of the Wii, and nowhere is that more apparent than the Sports Champion series. These are Wii Sports ripoffs. They have different games, they have a different art style, but it's very clear they were trying to trend in on that popularity of the Wii Sports, of motion control gimmicks, of casual software, and so they really, really did try. There are 2 Sports Champions games, cleverly titled Sports Champions and Sports Champions 2. Not Sports Champions Resort, that would be a little too on the nose. I also think it's interesting whenever there are live action people on the box art of any game, but Sony or Nintendo games specifically. I find that interesting, especially because this first one doesn't have real people. It has these, I guess these are their version of the avatars or whatever. But I haven't played Sports Champions. I don't even really like Wii Sports that much, but there are 2 of these games, and it's very obvious that Sony was trending in a direction to try to make some money and recapture a little bit of ground from Nintendo when the Wii was dominating the PS3 and Xbox 360, especially early on. And these came a little too late, and people don't really remember them. More forgotten PSVR games, Starblood Arena. You ever heard of this? This is a space combat game. You just move around in space with a little ship, and you play it in PSVR. Again, cool idea for a PSVR game. I'm very glad that Sony was publishing a bunch of games like this. Interestingly enough, this was developed by a team called White Moon Dreams, but helped by San Diego studio, who makes MLB. Yeah, just another forgotten part of PSVR history. New IP. I like that. I mentioned Starhawk earlier, and here it is. Starhawk. I'm gonna be honest, I know basically nothing about this game. It's multiplayer. It says best multiplayer for E3 on here. Boy, yeah, Starhawk is an interesting, just totally forgotten IP, and it's to the point where I recognize the name. I recognize Emmett Graves because he was in PlayStation AllStars Battle Royale, but I don't really know anything about this game, so I can't offer any insight. I can't offer any studio history like I have for all these other things. This is one that is even beyond me, though I guess I'll probably change that once I'm done recording this video because I want to know about Starhawk, but I'm pretty sure this is a more multiplayer thing, and so you can't really play it anymore, which there's a number of those, so it's not like that's unique, but yeah, forgotten part of PlayStation's history. I did it out of order here. This was sitting on my desk, but also there's another S game from Sony, Smart As, on PS Vita. This is kind of a Big Brain Academy, Brain Age type game. Really one of the only ones outside of, I guess, the Buzz series, if you want to count that, that Sony has ever published. Very forgotten PS Vita game. This game is kind of cool. It is structured in the way that you only unlock games if you come back each day. You can really only play for 20 minutes each day, and then you don't really have anything else to do. But you can change the internal clock on your Vita. Here's my Vita, just for fun. And change it to the next day, and then you've got more stuff to do. I did that a bunch. But you need to play this game for like 100 consecutive days to get the platinum, which is crazy. And another interesting thing about this game is that it's narrated by John Cleese from Monty Python. I love Monty Python. I did not know that about this game. It's a very British game. There was one of these games where you have to spell words. They tell you a word, and then you have to spell it out. And they were using like really, really obscure British words I didn't know. So I had to look them up. I could pause the game and look it up. But I had a reasonably good time with Smart As. I think this is the game that really made me want to do this video, because I just bought this 2 weeks ago and I played it and I'm like, I didn't know what this was. And I don't think most of you guys probably knew what this was, but it's the perfect thing. Like, if I hold this up, tell you a little bit about it, then suddenly you're like, oh yeah, Smart As, which is obviously a play on Smart Ass, which is kind of fun. But now you know what Smart As is. So congratulations. Very proud of you. Do you know what Start the Party is? This is the game that has, I think, the weirdest PlayStation trailer of all time. I will insert a little bit of footage of it here.
Strike a pose. That's one classy photo.
Little mini games using the Move controller and the PlayStation Eye, and yeah, there's nothing too special about this except for that trailer, which you're watching now. Let's return to Media Molecule and talk about the final series that they made, which is Tearaway, and then a PS4 remake / expansion of it on PS4 called Tearaway Unfolded. I love Tearaway. I think that it works best on PS Vita because I think it uses the gimmicks really well. It's a papercraft style sort of game in the vein of LittleBigPlanet, which also came from Media Molecule. Though this is a 3D platformer, not a 2D platformer. I prefer 3D platformers, so I prefer Tearaway to LittleBigPlanet. But I love the way they use the camera. You are like the god in this game, and so the camera turns on, and then it is looking at you, and you see your face. If you ever look up at the sun, it's like your face looking down. It does some cool things with the back touchpad, where like your finger will pop through the environment because you're breaking through the paper. That's pretty cool. I really do like Tearaway quite a bit. Tearaway Unfolded, I'm sure, is perfectly fine. It's great. This is a great game, and this is not a bad way to play it. But I think it's just more interesting to play it on Vita. But this is the perfect example of, oh God, no one's buying Vita games. Let's just put a little bit of effort into it, put it out on PS4, and hopefully that much more popular console finds a home. But Tearaway never really found a home, and I think that's sad because I love these little guys, and I think this is a great game. So I recommend go finding. I think this is actually on PS Plus. Go play Tearaway Unfolded. Or if you have a Vita, buy Tearaway on Vita. In the vein of Start the Party, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say, is TV Superstars. This one has a massive sticker on it. I lost my Gugon, so I have not been able to take off every sticker. And I'm anal about that, so I'm going to go buy Gugon eventually and clean these things off. This is just, you put your face into little mini games and like you do wacky things for the audience. Yeah, more PlayStation Move stuff, more PlayStation Eye stuff that's just forgotten time. Oh, this was made by Studio Cambridge, who became Guerrilla Cambridge. So there's another part of that studio's history. A studio you probably didn't know about, and a history you probably didn't know about, and a game you probably didn't know about. So TV Superstars, be the ultimate star. Yeah. But a series you definitely know about is Uncharted. This is, I guess, outside maybe The Last of Us now, this is the definitive Naughty Dog series. And oh, I love Uncharted so much. I've played all of these games, and I think even the worst one in the series, which is Drake's Fortune, the first game, Uncharted Drake's Fortune on the PS3, I think is the worst in the series. But even that game is solid, and the performances are good, and the environments are good, and it's very impressive for the time. But they just get better. Look at all that crap on Uncharted 2. Uncharted 2, iconic game. Many would consider the best in the series. I think Uncharted 3 is the better PS3 one. I still love all these games. And then I think Uncharted 4 is also amazing. I've been thinking about it lately, maybe the best in the series from a storytelling standpoint, introducing Sam and having Nate go through more of like an existential crisis. I think that, and also like tying back to the old games. I love the opening of this game. It's fantastic. And then people don't give this game enough credit. Uncharted Lost Legacy is a full Uncharted game. This game is, 8 hours long. It features a totally original story, totally original environments. It's a 5th Uncharted game, and really, it's a 6th Uncharted game because Ben Studio made Uncharted Gold Abyss for PS Vita, and my review on Backlog for this game says even a mid-Uncharted game is better than most games. This game is a lot of fun, and it works great for Vita, and it looks great on Vita. I recommend every single game in the Uncharted series, and the best way to play them is on PS5 through the Blue Point's Uncharted Nathan Drake collection, which remakes Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 from PS3, and then the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection, which I've never played and don't have, but might play down the line if I ever want to play the 2 games included in that collection, which are Uncharted 4 and Uncharted Lost Legacy. But every game in this series is great, and the rumor is that it's not Naughty Dog making it. That's fine, because there was a non-Naughty Dog Uncharted game that was made. There's apparently another Uncharted game in the works, and I'd be very excited for that. It's been 7 years now since this game, Uncharted Lost Legacy, so it is very high time for me to return to Uncharted. I love this series so much. It's been a while, and you probably thought I was done talking about supermassive games made with Sony, but I got 2 more for you. Until Dawn, which is probably the most famous game from them, period, and also the game people know that they made, but also they made a Until Dawn spinoff, a rail shooter spinoff on PSVR called Until Dawn Rush of Blood. I've been talking for 2 hours. Cut me some slack here. I'm losing my voice a little bit. But I like Until Dawn quite a bit. I've not played Rush of Blood. I think it's very cool that they made an Until Dawn spinoff. Unnecessary. I guess this game could have just been called Rush of Blood, but it ties these games together in a kind of interesting way. And if you hear the title Until Dawn Rush of Blood, this is probably the only PSVR Supermassive game that you'd be like, oh yeah, Supermassive probably made that game, as opposed to Bravo Team and Hidden Agenda and the Inpatient. But this is the point of this video. Did you know? I mean, you probably knew that Supermassive Games made Until Dawn with Sony, but did you know that they made all these other games for PSVR with Sony and a spinoff, a rail shooter spinoff for PSVR? Just crazy. Talk about Starhawk. Let's talk about Warhawk. This is a reboot of a early PS1 game also called Warhawk. That is another online multiplayer combat game. This is an aerial multiplayer combat game, kind of like Raid, I guess. And it says on here that you can play 2 to 4 players in one system. Really? Oh, I guess there's split screen. And then also 32 players online lobbies. I really don't know what to say about this. This was made by Incognito Entertainment, who made the reboot of Twisted Metal, which is interesting. David Jaffe was involved in that. I don't know if he was involved in this, but I never played this game. And I don't know if I even can, considering it's an online multiplayer game. But yep, another PS3 game that nobody really knows about. We got one more game to talk about today in my collection, and that is the Wonder Book with Wonder Book Book of Spells. Of course, everyone's favorite, J.K. Rowling, Wizarding World involved in this game. Do you know what the Wonder Book is? You probably don't. And I'm glad we saved this for last. Well, the alphabet saved this for last, because Wonder Book is a peripheral for the PlayStation 3. The PlayStation camera here looks at this actual book, and this book does not have pictures. It does not have words. It has these codes. There's like 10 pages, and it's just these slightly different QR code style things. And you put this down in front of the camera. Camera looks at it, and it like pops out little worlds, and you can do things like fold the book, and then if there's like water on this side, it'll like pour down to this side or whatever. You can close it. Very, very cool. I've not played Wonder Book yet. Wonder Book is interesting in that there are only 3 or 4, I think, games made for it. I only have one here. Eventually, I'd like to try to get the other games. That's a really weird set to collect, because most of the games only came in bundles with the book, which makes sense. But it does mean that it's a lot harder to find physical copies of these games. But I'm such a sick bastard. Obviously, I've collected hundreds of Sony games, and Wonder Book is kind of the ultimate. If you're a major Sony nerd, having a complete Wonder Book collection is kind of like, I don't know, that'd be like my magnum opus. But I'm very glad I at least have a Wonder Book and a Wonder Book game, because then I get to end this video by not only thanking you for watching, but teaching you about Wonder Book and letting you know, obviously, about all these games that I talked about today. Hundreds of games. Some games you're familiar with, some games you're not. Tell you a little bit of history of some of these studios, and just show you how weird PlayStation's history is. It goes back even further with PS1 games, which has even more forgotten games on it. Blasto, Jumping Flash. There's a lot of stuff on there. But I hope this video taught you something about PlayStation's history. I hope you had a good time hearing my anecdotes and some of the stories and some of the history about these games and studios. And just go out, learn about PlayStation, buy a couple old games, play something on PS Plus. They've got a pretty good library that's building there over time. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Subscribe for more talks about PlayStation. I don't really do these collection videos. This is my first one of these, so I hope I did okay. And I will see you guys in the future.